Dust swirled across the sun-baked main street of Cedar Hollow, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. The general store bell jingled as townsfolk shuffled in and out, gossip spilling faster than the sacks of flour on the shelves. At the center of the commotion was Jeb Harlan, the town's notoriously stubborn rancher. His hands, calloused from years of tending cattle and hauling hay, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. The incident began innocuously enough. At the edge of his ranch, a fenced-off area housed the town's prized prize-winning pig, a rotund animal with a coat that gleamed like copper in the sun. Mayor Whitcomb had declared it a symbol of Cedar Hollow's prosperity, and the townspeople took turns visiting, admiring, and feeding it treats. But something had gone wrong. The fence was loose at the corner, and the pig had slipped out the night before, leaving a trail of mud and overturned feed buckets that led directly toward the main street. Jeb, walking past with a cigarette dangling from his lips, noticed the chaos immediately. Children squealed as the pig darted between legs, knocking over barrels of apples and sending market baskets tumbling. "That pig's mine," Jeb barked, though the owner, Mayor Whitcomb, hadn't asked for help. Without hesitation, Jeb strode forward, boots crunching against gravel, and reached into the fence opening, hands moving toward the flailing creature. The crowd gasped, voices rising in a cacophony of warnings. "Don't put your hands there, Jeb. Please," yelled Mrs. Calloway, clutching her shawl like it could shield her from the madness. Ignoring the protests, Jeb gripped the pig's bristly back, trying to wrestle it into submission. The pig squealed, squeaked, and bolted in every direction, dragging Jeb along. He stumbled through the street, barrels toppling, carts flipping, and the townsfolk scattering to avoid the chaos. Old Man Harris' prized bicycle went flying, smashing into the bakery window, sending a cascade of flour and pastries into the dusty air. Yet Jeb persisted, muscles straining, sweat dripping down his sunburned face. Every time the pig twisted, he twisted harder. Children shouted warnings and laughter in equal measure, their voices echoing off the clapboard buildings. Horses neighed nervously in their stalls, sensing the disruption and adding their anxious calls to the bedlam. Some townsfolk tried to intervene, grabbing at Jeb's arms or the pig's curly tail, but he shrugged them off with surprising strength. The struggle turned the street into a chaotic river of mud, feathers, flour, and shouting. By the time the pig finally tripped over a wheelbarrow, Jeb seized the moment, wrapping his arms around it and hoisting it high. The crowd froze for a heartbeat, mouths open, staring at the man who had single-handedly caused more destruction in 15 minutes than the last storm had in a week. Jeb, panting heavily, set the pig down in the middle of the street, chest heaving, eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and defiance. Whispers ran like wildfire. Some cheered, some gasped, some shook their heads in disbelief. The mayor's face was a storm cloud, and yet there was a grudging respect hiding somewhere behind the frown. People muttered to each other, debating whether Jeb's audacity was reckless or heroic. And through it all, Jeb just stood there, dirt-smudged, sweat-soaked, and utterly unrepentant, as the pig snorted and waddled triumphantly back into its pen, leaving a trail of chaos, and a town that would not soon forget the day the rancher ignored every warning and did exactly as he pleased. If you want, I can also turn this into a tense, cinematic 4-scene breakdown with visual prompts perfect for video or images, keeping all the chaos intact. Do you want me to do that next? Dust and sweat mingled on Jeb Harlan's brow as he stood in the center of Cedar Hollow's main street, watching the chaos unfold around him. The pig, now safely corralled back into its pen, snorted indignantly, shaking the last bits of mud off its bristly back. The townsfolk didn't seem to care about the pig's dignity. They were too busy repairing the damage, shouting at one another, or simply standing in shock. Every eye in the town seemed to burn into Jeb, a mixture of awe, frustration, and fury radiating from them. Children peeked from behind barrels and doorways, giggling in spite of themselves. One boy, no older than 10, tiptoed closer, holding a handful of scattered apples, as if offering a peace token to the man who had single-handedly turned the street into a battlefield. Jeb ignored him, taking a long drag from his cigarette, the embers glowing in the late afternoon sun, and scanning the mess around him with a casual, almost nonchalant air. The broken window of the bakery still dangled in jagged shards, flour and pastries spread across the wooden planks like confetti from some absurd celebration. Jeb. Mayor Whitcomb's voice rose above the commotion, quivering with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Do you realize what you've done? The bakery, Mrs. Calloway's pies, Harris's bicycle, the street, it's ruined. Jeb shrugged, exhaling smoke lazily, letting the words fall over him like water sliding off a stubborn rock. It's all part of the process, Mayor. You can't expect me to just sit there and watch that pig run amok. The mayor's face turned red, veins throbbing at his temples. Sit there and watch, he repeated incredulously. Do you even know how much damage that beast caused? That was my prize pig, Jeb. Everyone knows what it means to the town. From the edges of the street, whispers began to grow louder. The townsfolk, who had initially recoiled in fear, now began debating in low, tense voices. Some praised Jeb for his courage, his sheer audacity and strength. Others scowled, muttering about reckless behavior and the unnecessary chaos he had unleashed. No one, however, could deny that he had done what no one else dared. Mrs. Calloway, clutching her shawl tightly, finally found her voice above the murmurs. That pig could have trampled my garden. My prized tomato plants. Jeb, do you have any idea what this means? Jeb turned to her with a faint smirk, brushing dirt off his sleeves. I have an idea, ma'am. But sometimes, you gotta grab life by the pig, and make sure it doesn't get away. You're lucky I didn't let it stomp all over Cedar Hollow before I stepped in. The woman's eyes widened, a mixture of horror and disbelief at his words. People began moving around, attempting to clean up the mud and toppled barrels, but every movement seemed to uncover more evidence of the chaos. Apple cores squashed into the wooden planks, flour dusted over shoes, a stray chicken that had fled from a nearby co-op now pecking nervously at the scattered debris. Jeb, seemingly oblivious to the mounting tension, took a few steps toward the general store, where a young clerk was frantically trying to right overturned shelves. He knelt, helping to lift a sack of grain that had torn open, spilling its contents across the floor. Here, let me help, he said casually, though there was a noticeable edge of amusement in his voice. Wouldn't want this place to end up looking like a barnyard on the 4th of July. The clerk hesitated, eyes darting between Jeb and the mayor. Thanks, Mr. Harlan, he mumbled, trying not to sound sarcastic. I guess it's better than nothing. Outside, the children had grown bolder, creeping closer to the center of the street. To watch as the adult chaos unfolded. Some mimicked Jeb's movements, pretending to wrestle imaginary animals, while others whispered to each other about the legendary audacity of the rancher. Stories of his recklessness and brilliance had begun to circulate around the town long before this incident, but today's event would surely become a tale for decades. Horses in their nearby stables shifted nervously, stamping the ground and flicking tails. The distant sound of a bell rang from the church tower, its clang a solemn counterpoint to the tumult below. Jeb, however, seemed immune to the tension. He moved with deliberate slowness, surveying each scene of destruction with a critical eye. At Mrs. Calloway's pie stand, a half-dozen pastries had been squashed beyond recognition. Jeb crouched, picking up one and examining it as if appraising a gemstone. Slightly overbaked, he muttered, then tossed it back into the mess. The woman gasped. You can't just. I can, ma'am, he interrupted gently, rising to his full height. Sometimes the world needs a little shaking to remind it we're all alive. You can fix pies, you can fix barrels, but a moment like that, you can't fix the story behind it. The mayor's face twisted into a grimace. He stormed closer, pointing a finger at Jeb. Fix the story. People were hurt, Jeb. Someone could have been hurt. You could have been hurt. This is not a game. Jeb's gaze didn't waver. No one was hurt, Mayor. That's the point. Chaos isn't always destructive. Sometimes it just teaches a lesson. Sometimes it reminds everyone what it feels like to be alive. Besides, he gestured broadly toward the pig's pen, now secured once more. I handled it. No harm done to the animal. No harm done to anyone. Except maybe pride. The crowd murmured, some nodding slowly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. It was a strange mix of admiration and exasperation. Even the mayor hesitated for a moment, weighing the spectacle he had witnessed. Jeb walked down the street, boots crunching over mud, flour, and scattered produce, surveying the aftermath. A group of townsfolk had begun working together, righting barrels, mopping flour, gathering stray chickens, and even attempting to piece together the shattered bakery window. Jeb offered no direct help, yet somehow his presence inspired others to act, a curious paradox that frustrated and bewildered many. He paused near the old water trough, wiping sweat from his brow with a dirt-stained sleeve. A young girl approached cautiously, clutching a small broom. Mr. Harlan, she said timidly. Do you always do things like that? Jeb chuckled, a low rumble that seemed to echo through the empty spaces between the buildings. Not always, little lady. Only when it's absolutely necessary. Or when it's interesting. She blinked, trying to understand. It was kind of scary. Scary. Jeb laughed again, shaking his head. Sure, life's supposed to be scary sometimes. Keeps the blood moving. He bent down, placing a massive hand gently on her shoulder. Just remember this. Don't be afraid to act when you know what's right. Even if everyone else tells you not to. Her eyes widened at the intensity in his gaze, then she nodded solemnly before scurrying back to help with the cleanup. Jeb straightened, exhaling a long breath, and scanned the street again. The damage was extensive, yes, but the town was alive, buzzing with energy, voices blending with the distant sounds of farm animals, the creak of carts, and the fluttering of newspapers in the wind. An old man emerged from behind a stack of firewood, shaking his head but smiling faintly. Jeb Harlan, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, you've gone and done it again. I swear, only you could cause a ruckus like this and leave everyone talking for weeks. Jeb gave a crooked grin, tipping his hat toward the man. That's the idea, old-timer. That's the idea. The mayor, still fuming, waved his arms wildly. This is unacceptable. The town will not stand for this kind of behavior. Not now, not ever. Jeb raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smirk. And yet, here we are. You'll survive. We'll survive. And the pig, well, the pig will survive too. He turned, walking toward his ranch at the edge of town, boots leaving deep impressions in the mud. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street and highlighting the uneven lines of destruction that trailed behind him. Children followed at a distance, daring each other to mimic his swagger. Adults lingered, muttering and shaking their heads, some in anger, some in awe. As he passed the bakery one last time, Jeb glanced at the shattered window and the flour-dusted floor. He grinned faintly, shrugging. Some things are just worth the mess, he muttered under his breath. The pig, now safely back in its pen, let out a triumphant squeal, as if agreeing with him. By the time Jeb reached the edge of the street, the sky had turned a deep, fiery orange. Smoke from a distant cook fire spiraled upward, mingling with the dust and the day's remnants. The town had been shaken, stirred, and scolded.